There are just so many different ways that we can approach building new neural pathways or new thought processes and just make it a much more enjoyable, loving experience as opposed to coming at changing our brains with so much anger and frustration. So, if you've been experiencing those feelings towards your brain, or maybe you're someone who got a recent diagnosis that you're really feeling discouraged with, I'm hoping today gives you a little bit of a framework to work in to start building a better relationship with your own brain. Welcome to the Love Your Brain podcast, the podcast designed for everyday people who are ready to hop off the negative thought hamster wheel and enjoy a less hostile environment in their own brains. Our brains are where we live our entire lives, and I'm on a mission to help people see that they have everything they need to make it a happier place to be. So join us for this episode of the Love Your Brain podcast. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Love Your Brain podcast, or welcome if you're new. I feel like I'm going to regret this. I'm recording this during a time where it's about time to feed my dog. I did this once before and it ended up being a disaster, and I had to re-record because she's probably going to get pretty vocal here, but we're going to try to get this done and not have an issue. And actually, it's very appropriate for what we're going to talk about today. So, today we are going to be talking about how to train our brains like we would a puppy. Now, when someone is looking to change their life, usually I recommend working with their brain first, working with how their brain is operating, because that is how we experience life. It is the lens in which we see the world, it's how we actually feel about the things that are happening around us, the things that we are engaging with. It all starts with our brain. So, whenever I'm working with anyone looking to make any changes in their life, the first place we start is the brain. And really, the first agenda item with looking at the brain is looking at how a person is relating to their brain. What is their relationship with their brain? Are they in a place where they're frustrated and angry with their own brain? Or are they in a state where they're just wishing their brain worked differently? Maybe just wanting to fix what they feel like is a broken brain. In so many cases, this is the place where I meet people. By the time they found me or initiate a conversation with me, it's usually because they've hit their maximum capacity of frustration, especially when there's someone who's in the midst of a struggle with something like a mental health diagnosis. Maybe they're struggling with anxiety or depression or an ADHD diagnosis or severe PTSD. Really, any mental health diagnosis, people usually start to seek help from a variety of sources. And from that place, they're really just seeing these mental health diagnoses as the root cause of all of their issues, especially when they're first diagnosed. They see their brain as a problem, as if something is really broken with it. And if someone else could just tell them how to fix that, then everything would be great. But unfortunately, trying to change something from a place of frustration or anger just typically doesn't work well. It either produces no result, no improvement, or it produces a result that's typically not what's desired. Now, think about with children. Now, way back in the day, before we knew better, people would discipline their children almost always in the middle of an angry episode, right? Like they'd see their kid doing something awful and they would intervene with anger. And, back in the day, that usually meant disciplining with force. Maybe that was, spanking or hitting them with something. And usually it was always done in a moment where that parent was feeling angry and frustrated with the child. And of course, now many of those children today are running to therapy to try and fix some of the issues that this has created. Being disciplined or disciplining in the middle of a moment of fury and of displeasure is just generally not helpful. And now, with much more understanding of all of our brain's operations today and how human interaction works, we can see that that not only didn't do a ton to teach kids, it also created a bit of a harmed relationship between child and parent. So you can see here, we didn't see a lot of effectiveness at teaching kids the right way to behave with that kind of discipline. And it also harmed the relationship between basically the teacher, the parent, and the learner, the child. And as we've moved through history with more research, we've found it's actually much more beneficial for a parent to wait until they're no longer angry to discipline their kids when you can. And also, of course, in why many cases it's actually more effective to approach disciplining a child with more of like a positive reinforcement approach. It's much more effective for the child and how they learn, and it really creates a much more healthy relationship between the two parties, between the parent and child. It makes it a safe environment for the child to learn, try new things, make mistakes, and be able to go back to their parent for support instead of being afraid of the consequences. So, hopefully, here you are starting to see how this change and how we help children to grow and learn has evolved over time, and some of the techniques that have been more effective versus less effective. So, next, let's talk about pets, specifically puppies. How do we train puppies these days? Most training techniques today will have you teaching your dog to do things by rewarding the desired behavior with treats or different positive reinforcement techniques. You're helping the dog to learn skills instead of simply punishing unwanted behavior. And really, the way we relate to our brains should look very similar. Now, do we sometimes have moments where we are frustrated with our new puppy that they may pee on the floor? For sure. But while we're training, we usually also have compassion for the fact that they're only doing what they've been trained to do. And if they've not been trained to pee outside or to let someone know that they need to go out, then we have compassion for them and realize that it will take them time to learn to pee outside instead of inside. These are things that just kind of come along with having this new pet that we're in love with and we want to see succeed, right? And it's the same perspective that can help us when we're working with our own brains as well. If we can understand that our brains are operating in whatever way they've been conditioned to operate, diagnosis or not, usually by the time we are adults, our brains have been trained to think and respond a certain way by the experiences we've had over the course of our life, healthy and unhealthy. These experiences have created neural pathways that have just become familiar and well worn paths in our brains. And it makes it so that our brains just keep thinking and operating the same way over and over again because it's familiar. It's what they know. So we don't need to hate our brains or be mad at them for operating that way. We can also see them and treat them like we would a cute puppy and have compassion for them when we see them doing things that we don't want because we understand that it will take time to help them to act differently. Correcting thought processes, just like changing puppy behavior, it's going to take time and repetition and a whole lot of compassion. It's not helpful to hate our brains into changing. We need to have patience and care with the process of creating these new neural pathways, new thought processes, because closing down thoughts that are not serving us can't happen overnight in most cases. And creating new neural pathways doesn't happen overnight usually either. This is a big reason for the name of this podcast, Love Your Brain, because that is the foundation of what I want people to take away from these episodes is simply to approach working on their mental health and the ways they think from a place of love and care with patience and compassion. And I'm just honestly not seeing that a whole lot lately. It seems like so many people are approaching their own mental health with frustration and anger and disappointment. And working from that energy is just not serving you. Now, not only is it more effective to approach working with our brains from a place of love, just like it's more effective to teach children from a place of love, to discipline them from a place of love, just like it is to train puppies from a place of love and compassion. Those are all way more effective approaches than coming at it from a place of hate. But also, it just feels better. When you are working with your own brain from a place of love and compassion, it just feels like a more enjoyable process than it does coming at it constantly thinking, I hate the way my brain works and I want to change it. So think about the puppy analogy. If each day you got up on a mission to train your brain to operate differently, like you would a new puppy, what would that look like? You would wake up excited to see it grow and change, right? Just like we do with puppies, realizing it has ingrained behaviors that maybe are not ideal. They might stress us out and test our patience at times, but they're a sweet, cute puppy that deserves the time and attention needed to really mold them into a well trained dog. And you're probably already maybe chuckling at this analogy, but it helps me at least approach things with a much more positive perspective than how most of us are approaching our mental health. Most of us are approaching our mental health with, this is so broken. I feel so broken. How can I feel better? But coming at it from this place of, I'm broken, it doesn't work, all of that, it just doesn't work well. I've heard it so many times after someone gets a diagnosis that usually they're hoping will help get them some relief because now they understand, oh, okay, this is what I have. Pretty shortly after that, they usually get to a place where they almost feel more discouraged because the diagnosis feels so much more permanent. Like, well, now I know that this is just how my brain's going to operate forever. And I don't care if you have a diagnosis or not, there are so many things that we can still change about how our brains operate. So it's really just not a helpful perspective to work from. In addition to all of that, think about what your brain has been exposed to over time. All of us have gone through traumatizing events, bad environments, maybe being surrounded by unhealthy narratives. Our brains have gone through a lot. And think back to that puppy. If you adopted a puppy from a shelter that had some negative behaviors, but the shelter told you that those behaviors were because this puppy had grown up in a dangerous or unhealthy situation, how much compassion would you have for the process of retraining that puppy? Probably a ton. I see things on social media all the time where someone rescues this animal and they're in the process of trying to, rehabilitate them and get them back into interacting with humans in a healthy way. And you just watch them go through painfully long periods of time of just exposing them to little bits of interactions with humans, trying to get them to behave in the way that they want. But they recognize that these animals don't feel safe. And it takes a long time for them to get to a place where they feel safe enough to start learning to behave differently. And what if we had that level of patience with ourselves, realizing our brains have been exposed to a whole lot that may have negatively impacted how they function? It will take time for our brains to start thinking differently about ourselves and the world around us. But doing that from a place of compassion and love is so much more helpful than from a place of anger and frustration. The other thing to remember here is that when it comes to puppies, you will hear people say, don't tell the dog what you don't want them to do. Tell them what you want them to do. Most trainers or even teachers of little kids will say to tell the puppy or the little kid what you want. Don't just say stop, no, don't do that. Because what happens? Well, when you say don't pee inside or don't hit your friend or whatever the case is, you're simply reinforcing the thought related to what you don't want. But if you can reinforce what you do want instead, the effectiveness completely changes. So telling the child, play nice with your friends, or telling the puppy, let's go outside and pee, creating positive energy around those options of what you do want gets a way better result. And again, the same goes for our brains. If we can start telling our brains what we want it to do with a positive approach instead of constantly thinking about the ways we hate how our brains operate, it's a way better approach to actually changing those neural pathways. Our brains need to know what neural pathway you actually want to create here, not the ones that you're displeased with and that you're irritated with. I heard someone say once to start cutting off the energy flow to the neural pathways you no longer want. And I loved that visual. If you aren't giving energy or mental focus towards those negative thought processes, eventually they cease to exist. You cut off the energy flow. If you think of it like a trail in the brain, that represents a thought process or a neural pathway. Trails only remain when they are maintained by someone maybe walking over them repeatedly, keeping them well defined, getting the weeds out, making sure you can clearly go down it. But if you are neglecting that trail, maybe no one's walking over it or only walking over it once in a great while and just letting things grow over, well, eventually that trail will actually disappear into the brush. You won't be able to find it. Much like the brain, if you focus too much energy on the thought processes you don't want, it's like you're walking down that same trail over and over again, making sure that all the weeds are pulled out and everyone can see it really clearly. But if you don't put energy towards it and instead start putting your energy towards thoughts you do want, then that old trail gets overgrown. It starts to slowly disappear. Those neural pathways or negative thought processes basically start to suffocate because they're not getting energy any longer and it just dies off. So, an example of this might be that maybe you hate that you're always going to a worst case scenario when something happens. It's your immediate thought of like all the things that are going to go wrong now. And you really would like to change that about your brain. You don't want to be someone who's always catastrophizing everything and thinking about all of the bad. You want your brain instead to start seeing opportunities in situations, finding the hope instead of always thinking the worst. So, how would you do something like that? Well, instead of immediately worrying about thinking about the worst case scenario, like almost worrying about worrying, or being angry at your brain for doing that, you can start practicing what you do want. For example, what is the thought you do want? Maybe for you, you want your brain to think, okay, what are the opportunities here? Make it a simple thought so you can train your brain to easily go to that thought when those situations arise and start practicing it. Be proud of yourself when you start to make that more of an automatic process. Celebrate it. That's what you would do with a puppy, right? Like if they do what you want, you give them a positive reinforcement. You give them a treat. You give them a reward for making a good choice. Do the same for yourself. Be proud of yourself when you start to see your brain change in a way that you want. Last week, I talked about a similar thing that I've been doing when I have a specific plan that I'm really hoping to execute, and then something pops up to make it go an unexpected way. I have trained my brain now to have this generic response each time when unexpected things pop up, and that is, oh man, this is exciting. Because I want to feel excited about the opportunities that pop up in these moments instead of seeing all the negatives and all the things that are not going according to plan. There are just so many different ways that we can approach building new neural pathways or new thought processes and just make it a much more enjoyable, loving experience as opposed to coming at changing our brains with so much anger and frustration. So, if you've been experiencing those feelings towards your brain, or maybe you're someone who got a recent diagnosis that you're really feeling discouraged with, I'm hoping today gives you a little bit of a framework to work in to start building a better relationship with your own brain so that you can create a safe space for your brain to start learning to operate differently. More like what you want and less like you don't want. All right. Have a great week, guys. I hope you found something helpful here today on the Love Your Brain podcast. Maybe a laugh or a feeling of validation, or maybe just a few moments to have company while you do your laundry. Whatever you take from it, I hope you enjoyed your time and leave feeling empowered to be more you every day. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the next episode, and leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Have a great one.